Welcome to the virtual presentation for the Environmental Assessment, or EA, for Capacity Enhancing Projects at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, or CLT. There will not be in-person meetings at this time due to the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency. Comments will be accepted on this presentation for 30 days following the posting of this video. Information on where to submit comments is provided at the end of the video and on our project website. If there are special requests for participants needing translation services for this video, please call area code 407-440-1060 and leave a message. Please note, no public comments will be accepted via the phone number. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a review of the environmental assessment process, identify the purpose and need of the project, identify the alternatives developed and considered in this EA, and review how the public can comment on this presentation. The City of Charlotte or airport sponsor is conducting an EA for proposed airfield and terminal capacity enhancement projects, also referred to as the proposed action. The EA was originally started as an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS. The EIS was canceled and converted to an EA on February 27, 2019. During the EIS process, a runway length analysis determined only a 10,000-foot runway is required to meet the purpose and need for the project instead of the originally proposed 12,000-foot runway. The Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, determined this change in runway length warranted cancellation of the EIS and conversion to an EA. The airport sponsor, which is the City of Charlotte, is now responsible for preparing the EA in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act. Similar to the EIS, the EA will evaluate the potential direct and indirect impacts that may occur from the implementation of the proposed action. The airport sponsor expects to complete the EA in 2021. As shown on the slide, the main difference between the CLT EIS and CLT EA process is the process management. All other elements of this EIS and EA process are the same when it comes to determining the need for the project, agency coordination, impact analysis, public involvement, public comment periods, and ultimately, the federal determination. What is the National Environmental Policy Act, also referred to as NEPA? The National Environmental Policy Act is a federal statute that requires federal agencies, in this case the FAA, to evaluate and publicly disclose the potential environmental impacts of projects before a decision is made. What is an environmental assessment, also referred to as an EA? An EA is a type of NEPA document that takes a hard look at potential environmental effects of a project. The EA defines the purpose and need of the project, in other words, the problem that is attempting to be fixed and the solution to the problem. It also considers a range of reasonable alternatives to the proposed action, impacts of implementing the proposed action, and mitigation of the impacts if needed. The EA also demonstrates compliance with other executive orders and environmental statutes, such as the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and the National Historic Preservation Act, just to name a few. As previously mentioned, the City of Charlotte is the airport sponsor and is responsible for preparing the EA in accordance with NEPA and all other FAA and federal guidelines. The City also leads all outreach efforts with community. The FAA is the lead federal agency and is responsible for the ultimate compliance with NEPA and the scope and content of the EA. The FAA will make the final decision on issuing an environmental finding based on the content of the EA and determine whether they will take federal actions for the implementation of the project. The FAA will ensure the EA complies with the National Environmental Policy Act, the Council on Environmental Quality (CEQ) regulations, FAA environmental orders, and special purpose laws. Landrum & Brown leads a team of firms that is preparing the EA. Landrum & Brown works under the direction of the sponsor in preparing the EA. The EA process follows specific steps that ultimately lead into an FAA federal decision on the proposed action. The process includes defining the purpose and need for the project, developing reasonable and feasible alternatives that meet the purpose and need for the project, identifying the resources present which could be impacted, and analyzing the potential impacts and mitigation if needed from the proposed action and the other potential alternatives. After those steps are taken, a draft EA is prepared and published for public review. There is a 45-day review period for which the public and agencies may submit comments on the draft EA. There is also a public hearing that allows commenters to submit oral comments for the official record, which are recorded by a court stenographer and included in the final EA. After all comments are received, responses to the comments are prepared and included in the final EA document. For this EA, the purpose and need has been defined, alternatives have been developed, the affected environment study has been initiated, and the preliminary impact analysis has begun. This slide presents the proposed action for this EA. The main elements of the proposed action include a new 10,000-foot midfield runway shown in the diagram in purple. The runway also includes a north and south end-around taxiway. West Boulevard would also require relocation due to the construction of the south end-around taxiway. The other main elements of the proposed action include expanding concourses B and C, decommissioning runway 5/23, and new crossfield corridor taxiways or taxi lanes as shown in blue on the diagram. Note that the sponsor has removed the new daily parking structure from this EA and is evaluating it in a separate NEPA document as the need for the project is prior to 2028 and an independent project. The EA will evaluate 18 resource categories for potential impacts due to the implementation of the proposed action and alternatives. Each category will be examined in detail in the EA. The impacts will be evaluated using guidance provided in FAA Order 5050.4b and FAA Order 1050.1f and associated desk references. Each of these resource categories is presented on the current slide and the following slide. Now that we have reviewed the EA process, we will discuss the purpose and need of the project. There are two needs or problems the proposed action is addressing. The first is the insufficient gate capacity and ramp congestion. A gating analysis was conducted from the latest FAA-approved forecast. The results of the analysis are shown in the table. Based on the gating analysis, a total of 140 gates would be needed in 2028, a shortfall of 20 gates even with the construction of Concourse A Phase 2 Pier. The future gate shortage would result in an increasing number of arrivals that must wait for a gate and an increase in the amount of time spent waiting for an available gate. The growing number of aircraft that must wait for a gate would result in increased ramp congestion. Excessive waiting for gates during peak arrival times can adversely affect American Airlines, which operates a hub at CLT, schedule integrity. In other words, American Airlines' on-time performance would be expected to degrade, and it may not be able to keep their schedule intact. Complicating the gate shortage is the ramp movement area surrounding the terminal complex, which creates an airside operating constraint. There are currently 5 concourses in the terminal complex which are served by a series of taxi lanes. The existing ramp area provides a combination of single taxi lane capacity and dual taxi lane capacity as shown in the diagram. The red taxi lanes indicate single bidirectional taxi lanes, which result in delays and congestion during peak operating times. The green taxi lanes indicate dual parallel taxi lanes, which provide the ability for aircraft to operate in opposite directions independently and allow for more operational flexibility for the movement of aircraft. One of the main causes of congestion in the ramp is the presence of the single bidirectional taxi lane from Concourse D north to Concourse E. Aircraft parking at the Concourse D and E gates must use the single taxi lane to travel between the runways and gates. These two concourses have 55 gates, or approximately half of the gate capacity at CLT, leading to high traffic volumes on the single taxi lane. Additionally, Concourse E is a regional jet concourse. As a result, Concourse E experiences frequent movements and more turns per gate than the other concourses, adding to the congestion issues. The second need the proposed action is addressing is insufficient runway capacity to meet the future demand at acceptable levels of delay. An acceptable level of delay has been defined as an all-weather average of 7 minutes of runway delay per operation. Airfield simulations were prepared to understand the level of runway delays at CLT. The simulations show throughput, which is defined as the number of aircraft operations that can be reliably processed by the runways, increasing by 13% between 2016 and 2028, whereas all-weather average delays increase by 21%. These changes in throughput and delay demonstrate that the runway system has the ability to achieve greater throughput beyond 2016, but it also does so at the expense of rapidly increasing delays. As a result, it is reasonable to conclude that the CLT runway system was approaching capacity in 2016. Between 2028 and 2033, the throughput increase slows down to a 4% increase while delays increase at an even more rapid pace, 24% increase. This relationship of throughput and delay indicates that the runway system at CLT would reach capacity prior to 2028. The proposed action addresses the insufficient gate capacity and ramp congestion through the expansion of concourses B and C and the construction of the crossfield corridors and dual taxi lanes around the terminal ramp. The proposed new runway provides additional runway capacity to meet the future runway demand at acceptable levels of runway delay. The Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ, and the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, require an EA to explore and consider all reasonable and feasible alternatives to the proposed action that meet the purpose and need of the project with lesser environmental impacts. In accordance with CEQ and NEPA, FAA guidance in FAA Orders 1050.1F and 5050.4B requires a thorough and objective assessment of alternatives. No specific number of alternatives is required in an EA. If an alternative was eliminated from the study, reasons are to be provided. The initial alternatives considered in this EA were derived from the Airport Capacity Enhancement Plan, ACEP, prepared in 2016, as well as input from the Environmental Impact Statement, EIS, and EA process. The range of alternatives include the no-action alternative, off-airport alternatives, and on-airport alternatives. While the no-action alternative does not meet the purpose and need, it is required to be carried forward in the assessment of environmental impacts by 40 CFR Section 1502.14d. The no-action serves as a basis of comparison during the assessment of the impacts of the alternatives. In the no-action alternative for this EA, airport infrastructure would remain the same as today, but with additional independent improvement projects currently under design or construction. Each of the independent improvement projects have undergone their own NEPA approval process. These projects include an end-around taxiway north of runway 18C and midfield hold pads circled in red on the diagram, a de-ice pad located to the east of runway 36C and crossfield taxiway circled in green on the diagram, and an additional pair of gates on Concourse A circled in blue on the diagram. In the no-action scenario, the airport would continue to experience increases in delay per operation with the existing runways, congestion in the terminal ramp and departure queuing area, a shortage of suitable gates. Off-airport alternatives were considered but ultimately eliminated from further consideration in the EA, as none of the alternatives increased airfield capacity to meet future demand at acceptable levels of delay or increased terminal gate capacity and reduced ramp congestion. These included construction of a new airport, use of existing airports, alternative modes of transportation, such as rail or roadway, non-aviation technological improvements, such as video conferencing, and aviation technological improvements. Aviation technological improvements include navigation, surveillance, and other tools for the airspace system and airport. On-airport alternatives that were considered to address the insufficient terminal gate capacity and ramp congestion included expanding the existing terminal, which is the proposed action, or construction of a new satellite terminal. Adding a pier to Concourse A was considered, but eliminated as it did not provide a sufficient number of gates, resulted in American Airlines operations being split across the airport, and would require an additional passenger processing facility due to the long walk times from the existing facility. In addition, the expansion of another concourse would be required as a new pier on Concourse A could only accommodate 5 to 6 gates. Expansion of concourses D or E were not considered as there is limited space to expand them without requiring the relocation of runway 18L/36R to the east. A satellite terminal was also considered but eliminated due to construction costs and increase in passenger connection times. As a result, only the proposed action, which includes expansion of concourses B and C, is being carried forward in the EA. On-airport alternatives that were considered to address the insufficient runway capacity to meet future demand at acceptable delays included 4 alternatives with a new 4th parallel runway. A runway length analysis was conducted to determine the length of the new runway. It was determined if the new runway is to be used primarily as a departure runway, the runway length required is 10,000 feet. If the new runway is to be used primarily as an arrival runway, the minimum runway length required is 7,300 feet. The runway alternatives were evaluated using a two-step screening process. The first step in screening examined whether the alternative was capable of achieving the purpose and need of maintaining runway delays below 7 minutes. The first step eliminates alternatives that do not meet the purpose and need. If the alternative was capable of achieving the purpose and need, it moved to the second step. The second step in the screening process was used to determine which alternatives were reasonable and feasible to implement when factoring in cost and time frame. The alternatives that were not eliminated through this screening process were retained for a more detailed environmental evaluation in the EA. Alternative 1 is the proposed action. It adds a new runway in between the west runway and center runway. The runway has 3,100 feet of separation to runway 18R/36L and 1,200 feet of separation to runway 18C/36C. It is assumed the primary arrival runways would be runways 18R/36L, 18C/36C, and 18L/36R. Because the new runway is anticipated to be used primarily by departures, it is 10,000 feet long in this alternative. Alternative 1 was evaluated using the two-step screening process. The screening found that Alternative 1 met the purpose and need and was considered reasonable and feasible from a time frame and cost perspective. Therefore, Alternative 1 is being carried forward for detailed evaluation in the EA. Alternative 2 is similar to Alternative 1, but it shifts the new runway 100 feet east. This alternative would operate with the same runway use assumptions as Alternative 1. The 100-foot eastward shift of the runway is meant to take advantage of potential future runway separation rule changes that could allow different uses of the runway. Similar to Alternative 1, the new runway is assumed to be a departure runway, therefore it is 10,000 feet long. Alternative 2 was evaluated using the two-step screening process. The screening found that Alternative 2 met the purpose and need and was considered reasonable and feasible from a time frame and cost perspective. Therefore, Alternative 2 is being carried forward for detailed evaluation in the EA. Alternative 3 adds an 8,900-foot long runway in the midfield. The runway has 3,400 feet of separation to runway 18R/36L and 900 feet of separation to runway 18C/36C. Based on upcoming runway separation requirement changes, it is assumed arrivals will land on runways 18R/36L, 1/19, and 18L/36R. The primary departure runways would therefore be runway 18C/36C and runway 18L/36R. As previously mentioned, the minimum arrival length required for an arrival runway is 7,300 feet. In this alternative, the new runway is longer to accommodate navigational aids needed for runway 18C/36C and the new runway. Alternative 3 was evaluated using the two-step screening process. The screening found that Alternative 3 met the purpose and need and was considered reasonable and feasible from a time frame and cost perspective. Therefore, Alternative 3 is being carried forward for detailed evaluation in the EA. Alternative 4 adds a new 7,300-foot long runway located 2,850 feet to the east of runway 18L/36R. The new runway in this alternative is 7,300 feet, as it would primarily serve as an arrival runway. Alternative 4 was evaluated using the two-step screening process. The screening found that Alternative 4 met the purpose and need. Due to the time frame and cost to implement Alternative 4, Alternative 4 was considered not reasonable or feasible and not carried forward in the EA for detailed evaluation. The following slides present the final three alternatives being carried forward in the EA that meets the need for gate and runway capacity and reduce ramp congestion. Each of the alternatives have the proposed action terminal and ramp expansion combined with each of the three runway alternatives. The potential environmental impacts of these three alternatives, in addition to the no-action alternative, will be evaluated further in the EA. As mentioned, the three alternatives will be evaluated for their potential impact on all 18 resource categories, including noise, in the winter of 2020. The draft EA, which will present the purpose and need, alternatives, and potential environmental impacts, is scheduled to be published for public review in the spring of 2021. The final EA and FAA decision is scheduled for the summer of 2021. If you would like to comment on the information you saw in this presentation or the EA, please submit your comments either by email to cltcapacityea at landrum-brown.com or via U.S. Postal Service addressed to Sarah Potter, 4445 Lake Forest Drive, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45242. All comments must be submitted or postmarked by Monday, January 4th, 2021. That concludes the virtual presentation for the CLT Capacity Enhancement Projects. The magnitude of COVID-19's effect within the national aviation system is unknown at this time. The aviation industry, despite every major worldwide incident, pandemic, or recession, has consistently recovered, indicating its resilience and the underlying demand for air transportation. It is unknown how long it will take to return to pre-pandemic traffic levels, and the timing of the EA projects could potentially be delayed beyond the originally anticipated opening year of 2028. CLT officials will monitor actual traffic and delays in addition to short-term forecasts to determine the most appropriate timing of the EA projects. However, due to the level of delays being experienced in 2016 and the fact that design and construction will take a minimum of 7 years, CLT is continuing to move forward with the EA to obtain federal approval of the proposed action. This will allow the airport to be shovel-ready when traffic returns.